After centuries of open conflict between the Solarian Empire and the Corvian Dominion, a fragile truce negotiation was convened aboard the floating citadel Estrella Station, orbiting a neutral gas giant. Warfare had ravaged star systems, leaving millions dead and entire planets uninhabitable. Commander Elias Tran, a decorated human envoy and former tactical strategist, arrived representing Earth's Galactic Council. Known for his unconventional methods and deep study of alien cultures, Elias was tasked with mediating peace. The year was 3147 A.R. After reunification, in the neutral zone around gas giant Iris, the station's grand conference hall, lined with hololithic banners of each empire's crest, was cold, sterile, and heavily guarded. Both delegations, Solarian Emperor Virak's court and Corvian High Chancellor Dorius, were tense, suspicious, and primed to spark violence at any provocation. Elias quietly recorded cultural protocols and past grievances in his datapad, knowing a single misstep could reignite war. The metallic taste of recycled air filled Elias's mouth as he observed the two parties taking their positions at opposite ends of the gleaming obsidian negotiation table. Solarian guards stood rigid, their ornate armor adorned with the sigils of fallen houses, while Corvian sentinels positioned themselves with fluid grace, their crystalline weapons humming with barely contained energy. Emperor Virak entered last, his imposing figure draped in robes of deep crimson and gold, a crown of twisted metal, forged from the hulls of conquered Corvian vessels, sat heavily upon his broad forehead. Behind him walked three women, his daughters. The eldest, Princess Alara, carried herself with dignified poise, though Elias noted the tightness around her eyes that betrayed her unease. The two younger princesses, Lenara and Kaelin, followed a respectful distance behind, their expressions carefully neutral. Chancellor Dorius approached from the opposite entrance, flanked by his High Admiral Soran. The Corvian delegation wore muted blues and silvers, their clothing embedded with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats, a cultural display of emotional transparency that contrasted sharply with the Solarians' stoic presentation. "Commander Tran," Emperor Virak's voice boomed across the chamber, "you stand between ancient powers. Do you comprehend the gravity of your position?" Elias bowed precisely 30 degrees, neither too shallow to suggest disrespect, nor too deep to appear subservient. "Your Imperial Majesty, High Chancellor, I am honored to serve as mediator. Earth's Council recognizes the profound histories of both the Solarian Empire and the Corvian Dominion. I come not to judge, but to facilitate understanding." Chancellor Dorius made a dismissive gesture. "Understanding? After the massacre of Vega Prime? After what was done to our colony worlds? After your forces violated the sacred boundary of the Crescent Nebula," Emperor Virak countered, his voice dangerously quiet. "After your bioweapons decimated 3 generations of Solarian youth?" Elias felt the tension spike. The negotiations hadn't even officially begun, and already they teetered on the edge of collapse. He stepped forward, placing himself physically between the two leaders. "If I may," he said, keeping his voice measured, "perhaps we might begin with the opening rites, the presentation of symbolic offerings, as agreed in the pre-negotiation protocols." The leaders reluctantly nodded. This was the traditional way. Each side would present artifacts representing their commitment to dialogue. Elias had studied both cultures extensively. He knew that for Solarians, these objects held near religious significance, while Corvians viewed them as binding contracts written in the language of symbolism. Princess Alara stepped forward with a small, ornate box. Inside lay a ceremonial blade, its edge dulled as a sign of peaceful intent. High Admiral Soran approached with a crystalline orb that contained what appeared to be a miniature nebula, the Corvian symbol of continuity and rebirth. As the two representatives placed their offerings on the center of the table, Elias sensed something was wrong. A high-pitched whine, almost imperceptible, emanated from beneath the table. Years of tactical training triggered his instincts before his conscious mind could process the threat. "Down!" he shouted, lunging forward just as the explosion ripped through the conference hall. The negotiation table disintegrated in a blinding flash. Elias felt himself thrown through the air, his body colliding with both Princess Alara and Admiral Saran as he attempted to shield them from the blast. Pain seared across his back as shrapnel tore through his diplomatic uniform. For several moments, chaos reigned. Security forces from both sides drew weapons, each assuming the other responsible for the attack. Emperor Virak roared orders to his guards, while Chancellor Dorius shouted for containment protocols. Elias struggled to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. His vision blurred, but he could see Princess Alara on the ground, a nasty burn marking her left temple. Admiral Soran was attempting to stand, his uniform torn and smoldering. "Hold your fire," Elias commanded, his voice carrying unexpected authority. This was neither Solarian nor Corvian action. This was sabotage to prevent peace. To his surprise, Emperor Virak raised his hand, signaling his guards to stand down. The Emperor's eyes were fixed not on the Corvian delegation, but on Elias, specifically on the human's wounds, sustained while protecting members of both empires. "The human speaks truth," Emperor Virak declared. "No honorable warrior strikes from shadow." Chancellor Dorius, supporting himself against a twisted metal beam, regarded Elias with newfound interest. "You saved Admiral Soran's life, and the princess. A debt of blood is now owed," Emperor Virak stated formally. He turned to Elias, his expression unreadable. "Commander Tran, you have placed yourself between death and my daughter. The ancient laws are clear." Elias struggled to recall his briefings on Solarian custom. Blood debt was serious. It created bonds that transcended political alliances. "Your Imperial Majesty," Elias began cautiously, "I acted as any would in service to peace. Nevertheless," Emperor Virak continued, "we recognize your sacrifice. I hereby grant you 3 days to propose a binding peace between our empires. Should you succeed, the Solarian throne will honor you as bloodkin." Chancellor Dorius straightened, his face betraying surprise at the Solarian's declaration. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "The Corvian Dominion acknowledges this debt as well. 3 days, Commander. 3 days to accomplish what centuries have failed to achieve." Medical teams rushed into the chamber, attending to the wounded. As Elias was guided toward the station's medical bay, he realized the explosion had created an unexpected opportunity. In their shock and grudging respect for his actions, both leaders had granted him authority they would never have conceded under normal circumstances. 3 days to end a galactic war. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Elias wondered if he had just been handed an impossible task or the chance of a lifetime. The sterile white ceiling of Estrella Station's medical bay came into focus as Elias regained consciousness. His back throbbed where regenerative patches had been applied to heal the shrapnel wounds. He attempted to sit up, only to feel gentle pressure against his shoulder. "The human awakens," said a voice, soft yet authoritative. Elias turned his head to find Princess Alara seated beside his bed. The burn on her temple had been treated, leaving only a faint reddish mark. She wore simpler attire than before, a high-collared tunic of silver-gray material, but her posture remained regal. "Princess," Elias acknowledged, his voice raspy, "I'm pleased to see you unharmed." "Thanks to your intervention." She studied him with pale golden eyes. "The physicians report your injuries will heal completely, though you will bear scars. Among my people, such marks are considered honorable." Elias managed a smile. "On Earth, we sometimes say scars tell our stories." An elegant perspective. Alara reached for a glass of water and handed it to him. My father has stationed guards outside this medical facility. You are now under Imperial protection. As Elias drank, he observed the princess more carefully. Beneath her composed exterior, he detected signs of exhaustion and something deeper, grief, perhaps, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. I must ask, he said, returning the empty glass, why you personally attend to a human diplomat? Surely the Imperial princess has more pressing duties. A flicker of emotion crossed her features. You saved my life, Commander Tran. In Solarian culture, this creates a bond of obligation. I tend to your wounds to acknowledge this debt. Before Elias could respond, the medical bay door slid open to reveal Admiral Soran. The Corvian officer had changed into a fresh uniform, though he moved with the stiffness of someone nursing injuries. Admiral, Elias greeted him. Soran inclined his head. Commander Tran, I bring you access credentials. He approached, deliberately keeping distance from Princess Alara, and placed a small, crystalline chip on the bedside table. This will grant you entrance to the Corvian War Archives. Chancellor Dorius believes that understanding our history may aid your mission. The way he emphasized the final word suggested skepticism. Elias couldn't blame him. The task of brokering peace in 3 days was absurd by any standard. I appreciate this gesture, Elias said sincerely. Soren's eyes narrowed slightly. Do not mistake pragmatism for sentimentality. Human. The Chancellor honors your bravery. But many Corvians remain, unconvinced of Solarian willingness for true peace. Princess Alara straightened. And many Solarians question whether Corvians comprehend the meaning of honor. The tension between them was palpable. Elias raised a hand, wincing at the pain the movement caused. Please, he said, if I am to succeed, I must understand both perspectives, not witness their collision. After a moment, Admiral Soran nodded curtly. I will return tomorrow to escort you to our archives, should your recovery permit. And I, Princess Alara added, rising gracefully, will introduce you to our historians. Rest now. Commander Tran, your time is limited, and your burden heavy. After they departed, Elias activated his datapad and began reviewing his cultural notes with renewed intensity. The explosion had altered the dynamic fundamentally, but he needed to understand precisely how. What did Solarians truly value in their ritualistic honor code? What drove Corvian insistence on remembrance? Most importantly, where might these divergent cultures find common ground? As his eyes grew heavy, one thought remained clear. The 3-day deadline wasn't just a diplomatic timetable. It was a countdown to either lasting peace or renewed devastation. The next morning, despite medical recommendations for further rest, Elias insisted on beginning his research. His body protested with each movement, but time was a luxury he couldn't afford. Princess Alara arrived first, dressed in formal attire that signified her role as cultural ambassador. She guided him through the station's eastern wing, where Solarian historians had established a temporary repository of their records. Our history spans 16,000 years, she explained, as they entered a chamber filled with hololithic data crystals. What you see here is merely a fragment, selected records deemed relevant to our conflict with the Corvians. Elias noticed how the Solarian archivists moved with ritualized precision, their hands performing small gestures of reverence before touching each crystal. Your people place great importance on historical preservation. History is identity, Alara replied. The dead guide the living through their recorded wisdom. To forget is to dishonor. This aligned with Elias's research on Solarian culture. Their society was structured around ancestor worship and martial tradition. Every Solarian citizen could recite their lineage back hundreds of generations, and warriors who died in battle were elevated to near-mythic status. I would like to understand more about your concept of honor, Elias said carefully, particularly as it relates to sacrifice. A shadow passed over Alara's face. "Follow me." She led him to a smaller chamber, where a single, hololithic projector dominated the center. With a gesture, she activated it, and the room filled with ethereal light. Figures materialized, Solarian soldiers standing proudly before what appeared to be a massive space battle. "The Battle of Crescent Nebula," she explained, her voice tight with emotion. 3 years ago, the Corvians violated our sacred boundary. Our fleet responded. The hologram shifted to show the battle in progress. Solarian warships engaging Corvian vessels amidst the swirling gases of the nebula. The imagery was breathtaking in its detail and terrible in its destruction. 27,000 Solarian warriors perished, Alara continued, including Tarek Vorn, commander of the Imperial Vanguard and my betrothed. The revelation startled Elias. He watched Alara's face, noting how she maintained rigid control despite the pain evident in her eyes. "I grieve for your loss," he said softly. "Grief is private," she responded automatically, then seemed to catch herself. After a moment, she added, "But I thank you for your sentiment." The hologram changed again, showing a ceremony where fallen soldiers' names were inscribed on what appeared to be crystal obelisks. "The rites of eternal glory," Alara explained. "When a Solarian dies with honor, their name is preserved in the Temple of Fallen Heroes on our homeworld. Their families receive elevated status, and their sacrifice becomes part of our collective strength." Elias began to understand. So, the conflict persists partly because each new battle creates more heroes who must be avenged, continuing the cycle. Alara's eyes flashed. "We do not seek vengeance, Commander. We seek justice. There is a difference." "Of course," Elias acknowledged, making a mental note of her reaction. "Princess, if I may ask, what would Tarek Vorn think of these peace negotiations?" The question clearly caught her off guard. For a brief moment, her composed facade cracked, revealing genuine anguish beneath. Tarek was dedicated to the Empire. He would do his duty. "But what would he want?" Elias pressed gently. Alara turned away, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. "He never saw his homeworld again after joining the Imperial fleet at 16. He once told me he dreamed of seeing the southern Cascades in autumn." Her voice lowered to barely a whisper. "He never did." The insight was invaluable. Beneath the ritualized honor and warrior tradition lay personal losses, dreams unfulfilled, futures stolen. This was something Elias could work with. Later that day, Admiral Soran escorted Elias to the western wing of the station, where Corvian records were housed. Unlike the solemn atmosphere of the Solarian repository, the Corvian archives hummed with activity. Technicians moved efficiently between data terminals, and holographic displays showed continuous streams of information. "We believe knowledge should flow freely," Soran explained, noting Elias's observation. "Our archives are living entities, constantly updated and accessible to all Corvian citizens." "A different approach to preservation," Elias commented. Soran led him to a central platform where a massive holographic display showed the Corvian home system. "Our civilization began here, in the Corvus system, 9,000 years ago. We expanded peacefully until encountering the Solarian Empire." The display shifted to show initial contact, diplomatic at first, then increasingly militarized as tensions rose. "The Solarians claim we violated their sacred boundary at the Crescent Nebula," Soran said, his tone carefully neutral. "What their records won't show is that the nebula contains the remnants of Arcades IV, a Corvian colony world destroyed by Solarian forces during the Third Border Conflict." Elias frowned. "I wasn't aware of this." "The Solarians consider the matter closed. They executed those responsible and offered reparations according to their customs." Soran's expression hardened. "But they never understood our perspective. For Corvians, remembrance is not about glory or honor. It's about acknowledging the truth of what happened. The hologram shifted again, showing what appeared to be a genetic repository. Thousands of glowing vials preserved in a crystalline matrix. This is our memory core, Soran explained. We preserve not just records, but genetic samples of every Corvian who dies in conflict. Their memories, experiences, even fragments of consciousness can be accessed by future generations. We remember them as they were, not as symbols or martyrs, but as individuals. Elias began to see the fundamental disconnect. So, while Solarians ritualize death as sacrifice, Corvians personalize it through preservation of identity. Precisely. Soran manipulated the display, zooming in on one particular section of the memory core. My brother, Terran Soran, was among those executed by Emperor Virak after the Battle of Arcades IV. He was a diplomat, not a warrior, sent to negotiate withdrawal of our research vessels. The pieces were falling into place. Both sides revered their dead, but interpreted honor differently. For Solarians, sacrifice elevated the individual to symbolic status. For Corvians, preserving the individual's memory, their actual identity and experiences, was paramount. Admiral, Elias asked carefully, if you could speak with your brother now, what would you ask him? Soran's bioluminescent patterns flickered, a Corvian expression of emotional disturbance. I would ask if his sacrifice was worth the continuation of this conflict. The answer mirrored Alara's unspoken sentiment. Both sides privately questioned the purpose of ongoing warfare, while publicly maintaining their cultural narratives of honor and remembrance. That night, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion, Elias requested private meetings with both Princess Alara and Admiral Soran. To his surprise, both agreed to meet him in a small observation lounge overlooking the gas giant Iris. The swirling storms of the massive planet cast shifting colors across the lounge as Elias outlined his initial thoughts. Both your cultures revere those lost in conflict, he began. But your methods of honoring them differ fundamentally. Solarians transform the individual into a symbol of collective sacrifice. Corvians preserve the individual's essence as completely as possible. Alara and Soran sat at opposite ends of the curved seating area, deliberately maintaining distance from each other. An accurate assessment, Alara acknowledged. But how does this help forge peace? Because beneath these different approaches lies a shared value, the desire to ensure those who died are not forgotten. Elias leaned forward. What if we created something that honors both traditions simultaneously? Soran's expression remained skeptical. Elaborate. A memorial ark, Elias proposed. A satellite repository in orbit around Iris Prime containing both Solarian honor records and Corvian memory samples. A place where the fallen of both empires are remembered side by side, not as enemies, but as individuals who shared a common fate. The idea hung in the air between them. Alara's fingers traced the faint burn mark on her temple, a gesture Elias had noticed she made when deep in thought. My father would never allow Corvian access to our sacred records, she said finally. Nor would our Chancellor permit Solarians near our memory core, Soran added. I'm not suggesting integration, Elias clarified. Rather, coexistence. Separate but equal facilities within a shared structure. A physical manifestation of mutual respect. He could see them considering the proposal, weighing its merits against entrenched prejudices. The symbolism would be powerful, Alara admitted reluctantly. A shared monument to sacrifice. A place where individual memories could be preserved without propaganda, Soran acknowledged. More importantly, Elias pressed, it creates a foundation for further cooperation. If your peoples can agree on how to honor the dead together, perhaps you can begin to build a future for the living. The silence that followed was less tense than before. Progress, however small, had been made. I will present this concept to my father, Alara said finally, though I cannot promise his acceptance. And I will speak with Chancellor Dorius, Soren agreed. The concept has merit. As they prepared to leave, Elias noticed something unexpected. A brief moment when Alara and Soren exchanged glances, not of hostility, but of shared understanding. Perhaps they recognized in each other the same weight of personal loss that had shaped their lives. It was a beginning. The following morning brought mixed news. Emperor Virak had tentatively approved the memorial art concept, with numerous conditions regarding Solarian ritual protocols. Chancellor Dorius remained skeptical, but authorized further discussion. Most importantly, both leaders had agreed to extend preliminary talks for another week, an unprecedented concession. Elias spent the day shuttling between delegations, refining his proposal while navigating the complex web of cultural sensitivities on both sides. By evening, preliminary designs for the Ark had been drafted, and engineering teams were calculating resource requirements. The work was exhausting, but Elias found unexpected allies in Princess Alara and Admiral Soran. Despite their initial reluctance, both had become advocates for the project within their respective hierarchies. Their involvement lent crucial legitimacy to what might otherwise have been dismissed as a naive human initiative. As the station's day cycle dimmed to simulate night, Elias found himself again in the observation lounge, reviewing schematics on his datapad. The doors slid open, and Princess Alara entered, her expression troubled. "Commander Tran," she said formally, though they had gradually shifted to using first names in private. "There's been a development." Elias set aside his work. "What's happened?" A radical faction among the Corvian delegation attempted to access restricted areas of the station, specifically my father's quarters. Her voice remained controlled, but Elias could detect underlying tension. Security forces intercepted them before any harm occurred. Elias felt a sinking sensation. An assassination attempt? That is the assumption, though Chancellor Dorius claims they were merely security officers who misunderstood their assignments. Her skepticism was evident. "My father is displeased." Before Elias could respond, the doors opened again to admit Admiral Soran. His normally composed features were tight with anger. "You've heard, then," he said, noting Alara's presence. "I was just informing Commander Tran," she replied coolly. Soren turned to Elias. "What the princess failed to mention is that Solarian intelligence operatives have been distributing falsified documents throughout our delegation, suggesting we plan to invade 3 Solarian border worlds once the negotiations conclude." Alara's eyes widened. "That's absurd. My father would never authorize such deception. As Chancellor Dorius would never sanction an assassination attempt," Soran countered. The fragile progress of recent days threatened to unravel. Elias raised both hands, physically placing himself between them. "Wait," he insisted. "This pattern is too convenient. Just as we begin making real progress, incidents occur that perfectly reinforce each side's worst fears about the other." Both Alara and Soren paused, considering his words. "You suspect deliberate sabotage?" Alara asked. "By whom?" Soran added. "Who benefits from continued conflict?" "That's what we need to discover," Elias replied. "But first, we must prevent these incidents from derailing our progress." He turned to Alara. "Can you convince your father to delay any response until we've investigated?" She hesitated. "Perhaps, if I emphasize the suspicious timing." "And, Admiral," Elias continued, "could you access station security records? If both incidents were orchestrated, there might be evidence." Soren nodded slowly. "I have contacts in station security. Discreetly acquiring such records would be challenging, but not impossible." "Good." Elias felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Meet me back here in 3 hours, and please, tell no one else of our suspicions." As they departed on their separate missions, Elias returned to his datapad. He had been so focused on cultural reconciliation that he'd overlooked a critical question: who might actively work to sabotage peace? 3 hours later, they reconvened. Alara reported that Emperor Virak had reluctantly agreed to postpone any formal protest, though he had doubled his personal guard. Soren had obtained partial security footage, showing both the Corvian security detail and individuals who had accessed the Solarian communication systems. The evidence is inconclusive, Soran admitted as they reviewed the grainy footage. But these movement patterns are inconsistent with official protocols. Alara leaned closer to the display. This figure here, the height and gait don't match any Solarian officer I know. Elias observed their interaction with interest. Just days ago, they could barely remain in the same room. Now they worked side by side, united by a common purpose. It was a microcosm of what he hoped to achieve on a larger scale. We need more information, he decided. But in the meantime, we should accelerate work on the memorial arc. The more momentum we build, the harder it will be for saboteurs to derail the process. Over the next 3 days, the pace intensified. Engineering teams from both empires began constructing the Ark's superstructure in orbit around Iris Prime. Though they worked on separate modules, the mere fact of their cooperation represented a breakthrough. Elias split his time between overseeing construction and continuing cultural research. Each evening, he met privately with Alara and Soran, sharing insights and addressing new challenges as they arose. During one such meeting, Alara revealed something unexpected. "I've been reviewing records of the Battle of Crescent Nebula," she said quietly. Specifically, communications from Corvian vessels before the engagement. Soren's posture stiffened. Those records were classified by Chancellor Dorius himself. As were the Solarian deployment orders, she countered. Yet, I provided you access yesterday. Elias watched this exchange with growing optimism. They were trading information that would have been unthinkable days earlier. "What did you find?" he prompted gently. Alara's golden eyes met Soren's. Evidence suggesting the Corvian fleet commander attempted to establish communication before opening fire. His transmissions were jammed, likely by the same faction currently working to sabotage our negotiations. Soren appeared genuinely surprised. "Our records indicate all hailing frequencies were ignored by Solarian forces." "Because they never received them," Alara concluded. "Someone wanted that battle to occur." The implications were staggering. If true, it meant the defining conflict of recent years, the battle that had claimed Alara's betrothed and solidified Solarian hatred of Corvians, might have been deliberately engineered. "We need to bring this evidence to both leaders," Elias suggested. "Not yet," Soran cautioned. "Without identifying the responsible parties, we risk appearing manipulative. Chancellor Dorius is already suspicious of human involvement." "Soren is right," Alara agreed. "We need irrefutable proof and the identities of those responsible." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert on Elias's datapad. Station security reported unusual energy signatures near the Memorial Arc construction site. Preliminary analysis suggested explosive devices. "We need to move," Elias said, already heading for the door. "Someone's targeting the Arc." Within minutes, they had boarded a shuttle bound for the construction site. Elias used the flight time to contact both Emperor Virak and Chancellor Dorius, informing them of the potential threat while carefully avoiding any accusatory language. As their shuttle approached the Arc, the majestic structure came into view, even partially completed. It was impressive, a crescent-shaped satellite with 2 distinct wings, representing Solarian and Corvian design aesthetics, connected by a central hub. Sensors detect multiple anomalies in the central connector module, the pilot reported. Consistent with explosive devices, station security recommends evacuation of all personnel. "Are there any ships in the vicinity that might be controlling these devices?" Elias asked. "Negative, Commander. However, A disabled freighter was reported drifting near the construction zone approximately 2 hours ago. It may be relevant. Elias exchanged glances with Alara and Saran. Can we dock with the Ark? Inadvisable, sir. If those are indeed explosives. We need to see for ourselves. Elias interrupted. Take us in. The pilot hesitated, then complied. As they approached the docking bay, Elias outlined his suspicions. The freighter is likely our link to whoever planted these devices. If we can access its navigation logs, we might identify our saboteurs. And what about the explosives? Alara asked. We'll need to disarm them, Elias replied grimly. Princess, your expertise with Solarian anti-bomb protocols will be crucial. Admiral, your knowledge of Corvian defense systems may help us navigate any countermeasures. Soren frowned. You're asking us to risk our lives on speculation. I'm asking you to protect what we've built, Elias corrected. This Ark represents the first real chance for peace in generations. Is that not worth personal risk? The shuttle docked with a metallic clang. As they prepared to disembark, Alara touched Elias's arm. Whatever happens, she said softly, know that your efforts have not been in vain. You've shown us a possibility we could not envision ourselves. Soren nodded in solemn agreement. The Chancellor spoke similarly this morning. He said you had accomplished more in days than our diplomats had in decades. The acknowledgement warmed Elias, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had a bomb to disarm and conspirators to identify. The Ark's interior was eerily quiet, the construction crews having been evacuated upon detection of the threat. Emergency lighting cast long shadows as they made their way toward the central hub where the anomalies had been detected. Commander, Soren called from a monitoring station. I've accessed the security feed. The freighter docked briefly at Airlock 7 approximately 90 minutes ago. 2 figures disembarked. One appears Solarian, the other Corvian. Collaborators, Alara whispered, the concept clearly disturbing her. Working together against both our peoples. Can you identify them? Elias asked. Soren manipulated the controls, enhancing the grainy image. The Corvian is Veltek Maros, a minor official in our Treasury Department. The Solarian. Dren Karath, Alara finished, her voice tight with anger. My father's former weapons master. He was dismissed last year for advocating extreme measures against Corvian civilians. The pieces were falling into place. Disgruntled officials from both empires, likely working for interests that profited from continued conflict. We should forward this evidence to our leaders, Saran suggested. After we deal with the explosives, Elias reminded them, which appear to be... They had reached the central chamber, the heart of the memorial ark. Here, the architectural styles of both empires blended seamlessly. And here, attached to both the power core and the memory repository, were multiple explosive devices. These are Corvian mining charges. Soran identified immediately. Military grade, but modified. With Solarian detonation circuits, Alara added, examining the nearest device. Deliberately designed to implicate both sides. Elias studied the setup. They've linked the detonators to both the reactor core and the memory archives. We can't save both simultaneously. The implications were clear. Even if they prevented a catastrophic reactor explosion, the blast would destroy the holographic archives and genetic repositories, the very heart of their peace initiative. Can we disarm them? Alara asked. Possibly, Soren replied, already examining the control circuits. But these are rigged with multiple failsafes. Tampering with one might trigger the others. Elias felt time slipping away. According to the countdown displayed on the nearest device, they had less than 10 minutes. We need to split up, he decided. Alara, focus on the devices near the Solarian archives. Saran, take those by the Corvian repositories. I'll handle the ones at the reactor core. That's too dangerous, Alara protested. The radiation levels near the core are within human tolerance for short exposures, Elias finished. We don't have time to argue. Go. They separated, each focusing on their assigned tasks. Elias made his way to the reactor level, where the pulsing blue glow of the power core cast everything in ethereal light. 3 explosive devices were attached to critical junctions. Soren, he called over the comlink. Talk me through the disarming sequence for Corvian charges. Cut the blue filament first, Soren's voice instructed. Then the red, never the green. That's the anti-tampering trigger. Elias worked methodically, his hands steady despite the pressure. Alara, how are you progressing? 2 devices disarmed, she reported. But the third is different. It has a secondary trigger linked to something in the Corvian section. Confirmed, Soren responded. I'm seeing the same pattern here. They're interconnected across sections. This complicated matters significantly. They couldn't disarm the devices independently. The system had to be neutralized as a whole. We need a different approach, Elias decided. Both of you. Meet me at the main control room. I have an idea. 2 minutes later, they reconvened at the ARC's command center. Elias quickly outlined his plan. The explosives are linked to both the main power grid and each other. But if we reroute emergency power through the maintenance systems, we could isolate each section, Alara finished, understanding immediately. It's risky, Soren cautioned. If the power fluctuates during transfer, then we maintain manual control, Elias insisted. Alara, you'll operate the Solarian power relays. Soran, the Corvian systems. I'll coordinate from here. They moved to their positions as the countdown reached 3 minutes. On my mark, Elias instructed, fingers flying across the control panel. Initiating power reroute. Now! The lights flickered ominously as energy flowed through alternate pathways. Warning alerts blared as the system detected unauthorized changes. Solarian section secured, Alara reported. Power stable at 80%. Corvian systems responding, Soran added. Isolating archive servers from main grid. Elias monitored the master controls, making rapid adjustments as unexpected surges threatened to disrupt their work. 1 minute remaining. I'm going to attempt to disconnect the detonation sequence from the timer. That could trigger immediate detonation, Soren warned. If we do nothing, we lose everything, Elias countered. Trust me. With careful precision, he accessed the central detonation control, a hybrid of Solarian and Corvian technology. Rather than attempting to disarm it directly, he introduced a feedback loop in the command sequence. 30 seconds, Alara called out, tension evident in her voice. Almost there, Elias muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The final command sequence was complex, a deliberate trap for anyone attempting exactly what he was doing. One wrong input would accelerate the countdown instead of halting it. 15 seconds! Elias took a deep breath, visualizing the entire system. The key wasn't to stop the countdown, but to convince the system it had already detonated while preventing actual energy transfer to the explosives. Commander! Soran shouted as the timer reached 10 seconds. With a final command sequence, Elias executed his plan. The countdown continued to its conclusion, and for one heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the indicator lights on the explosives changed from red to green. Detonation sequence completed, announced the automated system. No explosion detected. Fail-safe protocol activated. The bombs had attempted to detonate but found themselves unable to access the power needed to trigger the actual explosives. The system, believing it had failed in its primary function, had shut down entirely. We did it, Alara breathed, her composure finally breaking as relief washed over her. Soren approached, his bioluminescent patterns glowing with an intensity Elias hadn't seen before, a Corvian expression of profound emotion. That was impressive ingenuity, Commander. It was teamwork, Elias corrected. Neither of you hesitated when it mattered most. The moment of triumph was interrupted by an incoming transmission. Emperor Virak and Chancellor Dorius had both arrived on station command vessels, demanding updates on the situation. "We should return," Alara suggested, "with the evidence of conspiracy we've uncovered." As they made their way back to the shuttle, Elias noticed something remarkable. Alara and Soren walked side by side, no longer maintaining their previous careful distance. Whatever barriers had existed between them had been at least partially dissolved by their shared ordeal. It was a small victory, but perhaps the most significant one yet. The formal peace signing took place 5 days later in the station's Grand Assembly. What had begun as a 3-day mission had evolved into a comprehensive peace initiative involving hundreds of diplomats, engineers, and cultural experts from both empires. The Memorial Ark, now fully operational, orbited Iris Prime as a testament to their shared commitment. Within its chambers, holographic representations of fallen soldiers from both sides stood as silent witnesses to the cost of conflict and the promise of reconciliation. Elias, dressed in formal diplomatic attire that concealed most of his healing wounds, stood between the two delegations. Emperor Virak and Chancellor Dorius approached the central dais, where the peace accord awaited their signatures. "Before we proceed," Emperor Virak announced, his voice carrying throughout the vast chamber, "I wish to acknowledge the architect of this moment." He turned to Elias. "Commander Tran, you have accomplished what generations deemed impossible. You have shown us that honor need not come at the expense of peace." Chancellor Dorius stepped forward. "The Corvian Dominion concurs. When faced with sabotage and destruction, you preserved not only lives, but the memories that give those lives meaning." Elias bowed respectfully. "Your Excellencies honor me, but the true achievement belongs to your peoples. They chose to embrace possibility rather than cling to the familiar comfort of enmity." The formalities proceeded as planned. The peace accord was signed, establishing frameworks for mutual disarmament, resource sharing, and cooperative governance of disputed territories. With each signature, applause rippled through the assembly. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, Emperor Virak raised his hand for silence. An expectant hush fell over the gathering. "There remains one matter of personal significance," the Emperor declared. "Commander Elias Tran, approach." Somewhat bewildered, Elias stepped forward. "In accordance with ancient Solarian tradition, one who saves imperial blood is forever bonded to the dynasty." Emperor Virak's expression remained solemn, but Elias detected something like approval in his eyes. "I hereby offer you the blood oath of the Celestial Dynasty, marking you as kin to the throne of Solaria." The announcement sent murmurs through the assembly. Such an honor was unprecedented for a non-Solarian. Before Elias could formulate a response, Emperor Virak continued. "Furthermore, to cement this bond and ensure lasting unity between our peoples, I offer you the hands of my 2 youngest daughters, Princesses Lenara and Kaelin, as potential brides, should they find favor in your eyes and you in theirs." Shock rippled through Elias. He glanced toward Princess Alara, whose expression revealed nothing, though he thought he detected a flicker of... what? Disappointment? Concern? Chancellor Dorius stepped forward. "The Corvian Dominion would match this honor. Should you prefer, our noble houses stand ready to present daughters of equal station, ensuring balanced allegiance." The assembly had gone completely silent, all eyes fixed on Elias. The offer was both a tremendous honor and a political calculation. Binding the human mediator to both empires would create a living symbol of their newfound unity. Elias took a measured breath. "Your Excellencies, I am humbled beyond words by these unprecedented honors. The trust you place in me speaks to your genuine commitment to lasting peace." He paused, carefully considering his next words. "However, I believe that bonds of marriage should be founded on personal connection rather than political expediency. I would respectfully request time to know the minds and hearts of those you would have me consider, that any union might be built on mutual respect and understanding. A tense moment passed before Emperor Virak nodded slowly. Wisdom and caution. I grant a period of 6 months for such considerations. The Dominion concurs, Chancellor Dorius added, seeming almost relieved. With that, the ceremony concluded. As diplomats and officials dispersed to various celebration functions, Elias found a quiet moment alone on an observation deck, overlooking both the gas giant Iris and the gleaming form of the memorial ark in the distance. A diplomatic answer, came Alara's voice from behind him. Elias turned to find the princess approaching, her formal ceremonial attire replaced by simpler clothing. I spoke truthfully. Marriage should be more than a political tool. She joined him at the viewport. Among Solarians, it is often both. Love and duty are not considered opposing forces, but complementary ones. After a moment, she added, My father's offer was genuine. He holds you in high regard. And you? Elias asked, surprising himself with his directness. What do you think of his proposal? Alara turned to face him fully. I think that offering my sisters while excluding myself was an interesting choice. The implication hung in the air between them. Before Elias could respond, Admiral Saran joined them on the deck. Forgive the interruption, he said, nodding respectfully to both. Commander Tran, the Chancellor wishes to discuss your future role as liaison between our empires. Of course, Elias replied, though he felt reluctant to end his conversation with Alara. Princess, perhaps we might continue our discussion later? She inclined her head, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. I would welcome that, Commander. As Elias followed Saran toward the diplomatic quarters, he reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past weeks. What had begun as an impossible mission had transformed into something far more complex and meaningful than he could have imagined. The path ahead remained uncertain. Political pressures, cultural differences, and personal feelings would all shape whatever future emerged from this fragile peace. But for the first time in centuries, that future held genuine promise. Beyond the viewport, Iris Prime gleamed like a jewel against the backdrop of space. Once a battlefield, now the site of the Memorial Ark, a monument not only to those lost, but to the possibility of reconciliation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Elias knew that this moment, this achievement, could never be undone. Two ancient enemies had chosen peace. A human diplomat had become a bridge between worlds. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the galaxy, the cycle of vengeance had been broken, if only for a time. It was enough. It was a beginning.